I'm going to figure out what's inside of black holes, but I'm going to ignore everything we know about physics so far, and I'm going to start from scratch. I can tell you in advance that that person is not going to figure it out. The only way to move forward is to build on top of what we have.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 284. From scratch isn't really from scratch. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darin and Viktor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darin reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Viktor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darin Pope and Viktor Farsic.
Recently, I was listening to an episode of Oxide and Friends. That's the podcast from the people at Oxide Computer. And I don't remember who said it. I think it was Brian Cantrell said this next phrase. When you are using someone else's technology, you are using someone else's decisions. What do you think about that, Viktor?
There are two things that come to my mind right away. First, there is a choice. When you're using technology that you don't influence yourself, you should be adopting because of the decisions that people made who designed that software, right? Not because of necessarily of what that software does, which might sound confusing, right? A good example would be, Kubernetes and your attempt to move big, massive web sphere to Kubernetes, right? Those two are designed with very different philosophy and very different decisions went into designing those two. So you need to pick which one suits you better, right? The second thing I feel is important, and this might apply more to bigger companies than everybody, and that's one of the reasons why companies contribute to open source. Again, if I stick with Kubernetes, right? Why does AWS spend any amount of time, or Google or Azure, on Kubernetes today? Because every hour that somebody spends from those companies on Kubernetes, and I'm talking about contributions now, or reviewing or anything else, every single hour costs money, right? Why do they do that? And one of the big reasons why they do that are those decisions. You want to steer the project towards the decisions that make sense for you. And since it's open, you're allowed to do that, right? And that's how communities grow. That's how projects grow. But they're not doing that because they're nice people, just to be clear, right? They're doing it for very selfish reasons, and that's okay. And one of many reasons is, hey, I want to influence those decisions. So you can do that as well. You can adopt something and say, somebody else decided this is the right thing for me. I feel like I'm 95% right for me. I'm missing those 5%. Hey, that's an easy fix. Spend some time on it. You just want to make sure that what you choose is closer to meeting 90% of your needs than meeting 10% of your needs, so that the delta is smaller of what you need to do.
So it sounds like what you're not necessarily advocating for, but you're talking about how much do I really need to build versus how much do I need to buy?
Can I assume that when you say buy, you do not necessarily mean with cash, but adopt as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. And answer to that is very, very simple. You should buy as much as possible. Again, when I say buy, I do not necessarily mean with cash, right? As much as possible. You do not want to be creating a system that cater your specific needs, which happen to be the same as the needs of others. You want to focus on the things that are specific to you and nobody else. And no, it does not matter what you do. That is a relatively small percentage. There are very few, if any, company that can say safely, my special needs, some things that are unique to me, and I'm excluding stupidity in this case, are never more than, I'm half inventing the number, but let's say 10%.
Let's assume for a moment that they're not able to get to that point. Let's say that I am fully convinced that for my general compute purposes that I need in my company, just general compute, I don't like Linux, I don't like Windows, I don't like Mac OS, I don't like HP UX, I just don't like any of them. So I want to have my own operating system for my general compute that's using standard hardware. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
If you tell that to your investors, you're not getting the next round of investment. I can tell you that immediately. It's a very, very, very bad idea, because what would be your special, let's play that game, right? What would be those special needs, right? You will not have to manage file system, or you will manage file system in a way that is completely different. Nothing to do with how other operating systems are managing file system. In that hypothetical scenario, I can probably say that that's not the case, right? You will still need to move files around and have them, right? And you will need to manage memory and CPU and so on and so forth, right? So all those things exist. They might not be perfect, but they're better than you starting from scratch. So again, I know that there are companies, maybe not, that wasn't a bad example, but they say, no, our needs are so special. We are going to create our own operating system instead of jumping into Linux and saying, can I add the things that I need? And let me tell you that the things that somebody needs are much smaller than Linux itself.
And that's the point I was trying to get to in a sort of stupid way, is what can we do to get us even 60% of the way there, 50% of the way there? And then I have to just implement what's left. That will help us get to a probably more successful state than if we were to build from ground up.
Yeah. I mean, simply, you cannot advance in something, and I must assume that you want to advance beyond what everybody else is doing, right? That's the only justification of doing. I want to go beyond what others are doing in certain space, right? You cannot get there beyond by ignoring everything that was discovered up to that point. Let's say it's science, right? And say, I'm going to figure out what's inside of black holes, but I'm going to ignore everything we know about physics so far, and I'm going to start from scratch. I can tell you in advance that that person is not going to figure it out. The only way to move forward is to build on top of what we have.
How do we convince people that that is the true way? Hopefully they're at least in that space and that's how they think. But if they're saying, no, I have to build my own. So let's use a concrete example. Let's say I worked for NVIDIA. I don't work for NVIDIA.
Okay.
And I was designing the chips at NVIDIA.
Okay.
And I have to have custom firmware and software to run the chips.
Okay.
Right. Up to this point, you're okaying and I think you're saying yes on everything. But let's say for just a moment that I've got the board, I've got my NVIDIA chip on the board, but now I'm going to put some general purpose CPUs on the board to do whatever offloading that aren't NVIDIA. They're Intel, they're AMD, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Do I have to write custom software for that?
Probably not. I mean, even if you do, so let's say that you said you need to write your own BIOS, right? Was it?
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? First of all, you're going to find the guy who was writing BIOS for the last 20 years. Because he or she knows what it's doing, right? And even if that person writes it from scratch, literally, it's still not going to be from scratch. It's going to be based on his prior experience. And that person will tell you, that experienced person will tell you, okay, actually, for this specific use case, it's justified. But it's justified because I know what's in others. Now, if you say I'm going to write new BIOS, and by the way, I never wrote one before, I would fire that person immediately. That person is buying it off the shelf. The person who wrote already 17 others before has the right to say, I'm writing it from scratch because I've been through this. I know that it will cost less than if we reuse this or that. And even that person is going to kind of, okay, let me go actually even further. Let's say that BIOS will be written in C, likely, right? You're going to write the language yourself because you want to start from scratch. You're not going to use Visual Studio Code or whatever else people are using VI. You're going to write the editor as well, right? So it's never from scratch. You just need to figure out which parts make sense.
So let's go back to the statement again. Let's see if we can take it in a different direction. When you are using someone else's technology, you are using someone else's decisions.
That's correct. And let me just continue that sentence, because your choices match your decisions, right? You're choosing this, and this is based on somebody else's decision, and it happened to match, maybe not 100%, but closely, the decisions we made. That's the art there, right? I made this decision, and I need software to back it up. Let's see who else made that similar decision, and I can use that person's software or company's software or whatever it is, right? That's when you get good results, when someone else's decisions are matching your decisions.
Let's assume we can actually make a decision for ourselves. That can be complex at times. Let's assume we can. And we could throw out the two projects that both you and I work on. I work with the Jenkins project, you work with the Crossplane project. Jenkins is 20 years old in 2024. Crossplane is 5, 6, 7 years old, ballpark-ish.
Something like that.
Okay. So let's say there is a third entrant. And it's like, I want to write something that does what Jenkins and Crossplane does. Okay, fine. Are you not going to take the ideas? Just in that statement alone, I'm not necessarily using the technologies, but I'm being informed by those technologies how I want something to work. I'm being influenced by what I've seen in the past. And I'm wanting to make something better, faster, different. Doesn't really matter, just some mashup of these things. What's the chances of that person being successful in deciding that, okay, I'm taking the ideas. Before we were talking about just using the technologies. But now I'm talking about taking the ideas from technologies and trying to respin them into a decision that you weren't around for in the inception 20 years ago or 5 years ago.
Let me take Crossplane as an example, right? When people who started Crossplane project saw Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is someone else's, what was the word? Someone else's decisions, right? And then a few people said, you know what? Those decisions might fit perfectly into what we're planning. Excellent. Let's start it on top of Kubernetes, right? The decisions made for Kubernetes happen to match not 100%, but closely what we are trying to do. And remember, we're talking about Crossplane being born after custom resource definitions in Kubernetes arrived. Then also at one moment we looked at Terraform and said, there are good things that we should, it's not necessarily 100% where we want it to be. It's not even close to it. But there is 10% that is actually very good for what we're trying to do, where decisions happen to match. Let's use that as well, right? So it's all about matching those decisions and then being able to build something on top of it that is hopefully better.
I liked how you finished that. That is hopefully better. Because you won't know until you're done.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, right? And even if it's better, it might be better but too early, Heroku. It might be better but too late, Wasm. So it's not only being better, just to be 100% clear. But yeah, you cannot know, ignoring now whether it's too early, too late, you cannot know whether it's going to be better. There are many things that influence that end result, but you can try at least, right? And you can try to say, I can take what was there before and I can make it 2% better. And that's great. Right? 2% is great. Any improvement, and again, this does not necessarily apply only to software engineering, but to anything, right? Hey, if we can make things slightly better, and then next year slightly better more, and so on and so forth, that's how we move forward. That's how we ended up with electric cars today instead of donkeys.
The other way to think about this is there's nothing new under the sun. Here's one of my favorite examples of this.
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX. Love him or hate him, Elon Musk has probably done more in recent history for space travel than anyone else.
Yes.
We could throw Jeff Bezos in there too, and other companies.
Yeah.
But think about this. Rockets, in the way that SpaceX has built them, have a history going back to the Mercury rockets in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's that they still use liquid oxygen and other types of gases that came up through that. So you've had these math fast 50, 60 years of basic rocketry. Actually, if you really want to go way back, fireworks in China in the thousands of years ago, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't anything new. But how many people prior to SpaceX were actually able to land a rocket?
I think that the question you said at the very beginning of that discourse, you said something along the lines of how nobody ever creates something new. And that's true. For a simple reason, because to create something truly new, you would need to ignore everything that existed before you, right? The real question is, did you create something newer or slightly better, right? I'm not following closely rockets, so if any of our listeners notices that I'm saying something incorrect, let us know in the comments. But he improved. Those are better rockets than they were before. They can be reused, for example, right? That's an improvement. Is it new that, hey, nobody ever, it's completely 100% new design of everything. He reinvented completely combustion engine, right? And what's not. No. But is it newer? Is it better? Yes.
I have to admit, I'm a rocket nerd. Not to the extreme of other people, but that's sort of where I'm at. But if you think about a SpaceX launch,
mm-hmm.
and I think I'll get to a point, I'm not sure, we'll see if it works out or not. You do a launch, you see cameras, you see the ship separate from the booster, and you still have a camera on the ship until you see, let's say it's what's the satellite called? Drawing a blank. Not, whatever the satellite is. Help me. You remember this.
The satellite, I don't know. IIS?
No. That's the space station.
You see how much I know? I told you now already all the satellites I ever heard of.
Anyway, whatever the satellite service is, it's not SpaceX. It's whatever, they launch them up and they launch all the satellites, right?
Yeah.
To be able, and then that ship, the booster lands and they reuse it. Again, that's the new part. But something that you said a moment ago was interesting. Let's say I create something brand new. I'm going to add a sentence onto that. In my eyes. What if in reality I've been living in a bubble and didn't realize this was created 300 years ago?
So let's say that the way how you can create something new would be that you were abandoned by your parents in the middle of jungle without any human contact. And then you came up with fire that might or might not exist outside of your area. You don't know. You created something new. But if you're in contact with other humans, you cannot create something new. You can just improve on what existed. Kind of, let's say that I'm imagining a lot of math is required, right? Kind of like for those rockets. You're not creating your own calculus.
Are you saying that Newton never existed? By the way, the satellite's Starlink. I just forgot Starlink.
That's the satellite. Okay, yeah.
So, anyway. But so what you're stating is, therefore, since I live in a bubble, I never knew of Newton. I never knew of the Wright brothers. I never knew of Tesla. I never knew of Edison.
Yeah. Zero contact with humanity, right? And then you can create something new.
But it's not new. That's my argument.
I mean, maybe you will figure out how to, I don't know, create liquid fire. I don't know whether that exists. I don't know. I cannot come up with something that doesn't exist, right? But you might create something completely new. I don't know, right? It's highly unlikely because you're competing with zillions and zillions of humans that will work together against you alone. So highly unlikely, but hey, if you have a child that was just born, try it out.
Lock them away. Don't ever let them see. It sounds like a movie. It sounds like a few movies, actually.
I mean, it needs to be literally jungle because you cannot lock the child in a basement because then still that child is surrounded with the construction of that basement. That's already some knowledge.
If people are confused to the point, and I think probably if you've listened this far, you're probably pretty confused. If they are convinced that I need to build everything from scratch, realize you're actually not building anything from scratch. Is that true or false?
Yeah, you're not building anything. I mean, it's humanly impossible. Kind of, you start with building your own hardware, figuring out networking, cables. You cannot do it, of course. Realistically, when we see something new, build it from scratch, what we really mean is build something from scratch on top of things that already existed. Right, you're going to use whichever language you choose. That's going to run on top of Linux, and so on and so forth. Right. So when we say from scratch, we mean that part of it, and I'm ignoring even in that case the fact that you're going to use some libraries that are already doing things, and so on and so forth. So you are building a small portion of something and reusing everything else, and even that small portion probably already exists. So it's even smaller than. Of that small portion, big part is still wasting time. I don't know whether you were in those discussions. I really remember maybe first 4, even 5 years since Docker came along, was introduced to us. I remember people discussing with me, oh, no, I'm building my own container engine. I like C and this and that, and great, right? And that even made some sense back in the day because you can say, okay, Docker is just starting. Maybe I can do better, right? It turned out that you couldn't, but hey, who knows? And now if you do it today, you're going to make your own container engine because you're unsatisfied with the single missing feature in containers today. You're a fool.
That's actually an interesting way to take a look at it. If you're looking at competing early on with a product versus with a mature product, those are two completely different strategies that you would play out.
Remember orchestration? Like there was Docker Swarm, there was Nomad, there was Mesos, and all of those made sense at that time. And honestly, back in the day, if you ask me with Viktor, can you tell me which is the one that makes the sense? I would say, I would vote for one, but in retrospective, I recognize that I would be a fool, right? And that's the orchestrators that we know of. Like, have you ever heard of Tupperware?
I have heard of Tupperware.
There we go, another orchestrator. And you're probably one of the 17 people in the world who heard about it, right? maybe a slightly bigger number, but not many people, right? And it made perfect sense. We did not know what will and will not and how it will play out, right? We want that type of competition. But if you're entering into that competition, you're entering with clear mind. You know what you're trying to accomplish, right? And you have the resources and what's not. So it makes sense only if you start early and if you're aware of the cost of that something, right? Tupperware, Facebook could put 10 engineers on Tupperware, right? Can you afford 10 engineers? Back in the day. Today, you're a fool. Kind of like there is no even discussion if you would try to create your own orchestrator.
Or maybe not. Maybe the next true orchestrator, the orchestrator, is being worked on right now.
Yeah, but it will be based on some other principles, some other ideas. You will not build an orchestrator that tries to figure out where to run a container, and I'm greatly simplifying it now, and expose those decisions through an API. If that's what you're trying to do, then you're a fool, thinking that you can replace Kubernetes. Now, if you have some fundamentally different idea how we should manage resources, then eventually somebody will come along and have that idea, and it will replace Kubernetes. And that is inevitable to happen, but it will not replace it by being a tool that figures out where to run a container. We already have that. It will be something based on a very, very different ideas, or ideas in plural. The question here is, are you aware of those decisions? I think that's the key question that we did not discuss. Are you aware of the decisions taken and influencing the end result that you are choosing?
Why would that matter? Why would I care about those decisions?
Because by knowing those decisions, you know the intention behind it, right? Maybe you're trying to you're adopting Kubernetes because you want to, Kubernetes is not a good example, but hey, you're adopting containers so that you can run WebSphere in them, right? If that's what you're doing, then you do not understand the decisions behind containers. And through those decisions, you do not understand the intentions of containers. And you don't understand when they're a good fit and when they're not.
So what you're saying is, if we don't understand the core decisions for why a technology was created, the chances of us using it successfully are lowered.
Yeah, maybe you will randomly then end up using it for the right purpose, for right reasons, or maybe not, but then it's very random. First, I decide that I'm going to use this, and then I'm going to put that into this, right? And they're not a fit, and you have no idea until you put it in it.
Maybe it's something like, I need a refrigerator. I need to buy the refrigerator from the store, and I need to drive it to my house.
Yeah, and then you're going to turn it on and fry some bacon on it.
I fry bacon on a refrigerator? I didn't know that.
I mean, if you're not aware that refrigerator serves a purpose of cooling things down, if you're not aware of that fact, then for all I know, you bought it to fry bacon on it.
I left out some key points in my example there. I need to buy a Viking double-sided refrigerator, and I only have a Prius to drive it home in.
That's me. I thought that everybody in States has a pickup truck.
Well, we do, but that's a different conversation. But even then, I wouldn't be able to get it out because I can't handle that large of a system refrigerator by myself. So understanding the decisions that were made on the technologies that you're using, if you just say, I looked at this blog post, I saw this YouTube short, I saw this TikTok that said, Kubernetes is everything, so therefore we must do Kubernetes. Look, if you're doing TikTok-driven development, stay far away. That's all I'm asking. Stay far away. So what do you think? Do you use other people's technologies? Do you go in and try to figure out what those decisions were to why that technology exists? Go over to the Slack workspace, head to the podcast channel, look for episode number 284, and leave your comments there.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.